Kingdom divided.
Tomorrow, when Joan of Arc burns at the stake,
She's a witch,
I
understandable.
want you to watch carefully. Not the young woman in the flames, but the men who sentenced her to burn. The English will carry out the sentence, but when nothing but her ashes remains, it is the Grand Duke of the West, our Duke of Burgundy, that will have seized a triumph. For you see, this spectacle is not really about the Maid of Orleans. Her death is only as important as the benefit that it brings us. What burns on that pyre is not Joan the person, but La Pucelle, the symbol of the French resistance. You are young, my son. You have never seen our duchy as anything but a powerful state. But we were not always so mighty. In the greater tale of history, Burgundy is but a newborn power, carved from the lands of the kingdoms and empires that surround us. Our ascent began with John the Fearless, the father of our current duke. Up until then, the Dukes of Burgundy and the Armagnac faction had been equal rivals, fighting for influence at the court of the mad king of France.
Angry.
Louis, the leader of the Armagnac faction, had been using the funds of the French crown for years to stifle John in any way possible. He also boasted of having bedded John's wife. Tiring of these insults, and Louis's abuse of royal influence, John decided to end their rivalry for good. Just 3 years into his reign, he sent 15 men to stab the Armagnac Duke to death on the streets of Paris in broad daylight. It was a true show of force. In one bloody act, John established himself as the most powerful duke in France. The Armagnac faction, now leaderless, began preparing for a long war. To keep the Burgundians occupied, they supported a revolt in the city of Liège, which was ruled by John's brother-in-law, the Duke of Bavaria. John the Fearless would not let such unrest spoil his plans for the Grand Duchy. And so he marched his armies north, to a small village outside Liège called Auteuil.
It always helps me when you do that.
John the Fearless was now the most powerful man in France. But his rivals, the House of Armagnac, had not been idle. Now led by the fearsome Count Bernard, they built an alliance against John that included the Dukes of Orléans and Bourbon, and the Count of Alençon. Bernard sent bands of ravaging mercenaries into the lands controlled by John to draw him out. For John, this was the last straw. He marched his army out of Paris to face the burgeoning alliance. And so France fell headlong into a war that would last for decades.
Like and subscribe. That helps me out a lot.
In England, they celebrate the Battle of Agincourt as a victory over France. In truth, it was a victory only over the Armagnacs. The Burgundians stayed out of the fight, and John eagerly watched as the English king did his work for him, decimating the Armagnac alliance. Still, the English invasion of France had swiftly turned in Henry's favor. With the road to Paris now open, he marched his armies towards the French capital. Sensing his time to strike, John the Fearless rallied his armies. He would race the English to Paris and seize it from the Armagnacs before Henry could arrive. You see, my son, it was not John the Fearless who brought La Pucelle to the stake here in Rouen, but his son, our great Duke, Philippe the Good. Until this point, he had been ruling the Burgundian Low Countries in his family's name, presiding over an economic and cultural golden age in this corner of Europe. Outraged by the murder of his father, He quickly formed an alliance with the English to avenge the death of John the Fearless. But his war against the Armagnacs would have to wait. The Duke of Bavaria, who had fought with John at the Battle of Auteuil many years before, once more called for help from the Burgundians. This time it was not against an Armagnac revolt, but against his own niece. Jacqueline of Hainaut was not a woman content with obeying orders. For a short time, she had been the queen-to-be of all of France. But when her husband died, she was quickly relegated to her Dutch holdings. With her claim to the Low Countries contested by the Burgundians, she fled across the English Channel, where she married the Lord Protector of England. Together, they now returned to claim the lands that she had lost to the Duke of Bavaria. Philippe, seeing his northern realms under attack by an English renegade, rode north to push them back into the sea. This is where we will stand tomorrow, my son, when Joan of Arc burns. Already they are dousing the pyre with oil. This is to be no ordinary fire, you see. The flames must rise high for La Pucelle, as if they truly were the fires of hell.
Nice, yes, yes.
For a long time, she was a nuisance to Duke Philippe. He never could understand her zealous wrath, her single-mindedness, and how she seemed to truly believe the words of fire that she spoke. Compared to him, the ruthless politician, she was another being entirely. But at this point, La Pucelle was not on Philippe's mind. For even as Joan dealt defeats to the Burgundian forces in France, Philippe had yet to deal with the escaped Jacqueline. In Holland, Jacqueline had found new supporters in the so-called Hooks, noblemen of low birth. For years, they had been fighting a civil war with the merchant class, known as the Cods.
Great names.
Philippe now had to walk into this mire of old grudges and blood feuds to finally defeat the elusive Jacqueline. Since the rise of the Maid of Orleans, the war had not been going well for England and Burgundy. In a matter of days, Joan had crushed the combined English and Burgundian forces at Orleans. And now, for a year, she had campaigned with the Armagnac army, bringing it victory after victory. Only recently had she suffered a setback, as her forces failed to take Paris from the English. She was not a warrior. At just 19 years of age, she carried nothing but a banner into battle. Yet her tactics and her fiery speeches, that seemed to be the very word of God, had made her the Armagnac's greatest weapon. Philippe resolved to put an end to her for good. His forces were laying siege to Compiègne when word reached him that Joan and her loyal followers had snuck into the city to aid the defenders. This would be the day that the Maid of Orleans fell.